Welcome to Ask a Celebrant, a conversational podcast answering your questions relating to all the commemoration and celebrations of all the chapters of your life. I'm Bernie B, full life celebrant.
And I'm Dinah Liversidge. Hi everyone, Dinah and Bernie here, and welcome to Ask a Celebrant.
Hi everyone, hi.
So we're really glad to have you back, and thank you all for your lovely feedback after our last episode in which we talked about the loss of a much loved pet. I must say several of you very kindly reached out to me in particular and expressed how sad you were to hear about Branston, and I so appreciated that. Thank you. It's kind of one of the things we talked about, isn't it, Bernie? This sense of should I reach out, should I acknowledge? And it meant the world that you did. So thank you, everybody. We were going to continue today to talk about how, as celebrants, we support people going through that end of life, whether it's they've just lost somebody, sometimes it's in the process while they're losing somebody, and also afterwards. You know, a client said to me recently, who I called 8 weeks after we did a service where he'd lost his wife. And I phoned just to see how he was and said, "How are you doing?" And the first thing he said to me was, "It's gone so quiet." Everybody was there for that first 6 or 8 weeks, being supportive, asking how he was, even still turning up with, you know, dishes of lasagna. Yeah. And suddenly, 2 months after it's happened, it's as if, well, you should be over it by now. You should be cracking on.
I find that with my clients is that, you know, I mean, I always diarise that at 3 months or 4 months, I always make contact. I say, "Can't believe it's been 3 months since, just checking you're okay." And I usually send them something, a card or a letter or something like that, just really, because people do. I mean, people's lives go back into their old routine, and you're left either struggling to deal with grief alone or largely alone, or feeling guilty or worried that you should have moved on by now because everyone else has. But you know that, as we said, and we repeatedly say, there's no script, there's no rules, there's no time frame, and it's very unlikely, but not wrong, if you have got over it and moved on or dealt with things in that quick time frame. But if you haven't, that it's very normal. Everything is normal when it comes to grief, in that nothing is normal and prescriptive. You know?
What a beautiful thing to say, Bernie. I think that is a really helpful message for people. Nothing and everything in your grief is normal. And even you as an individual will experience grief in different ways depending on your age, how you're feeling, who we're talking about. You know, let's be honest, even your hormones. I lost a dear friend when I was going through menopause, and I literally couldn't stop crying for a week. And I remember another friend saying to me, "Gosh, I didn't know you were that close." And me thinking at the time, how insensitive are you? But actually what she was saying was, I don't know how to deal with your grief. And it's okay not to know, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I've noticed, you know, I've had several occasions now where I known someone who isn't dead, but is going through the dying process with a terminal illness or just with age, and the way that they are they're dealing with their own grief and their family's grief is difficult because of the way those outside quite often will deal with it by looking but not speaking, or avoiding or evading. And it's not because they don't care, it's because they don't know how much they're supposed to know and how you're going to react if they say something and whether they should bring it up. So it's all of this is and that is misinterpreted, so that people, you know, if you're grieving and someone crosses the road because they don't know whether they should ask you if you're okay or not, it's not because they don't care necessarily, it's because we have so disconnected with the process of death and dying.
Yes, absolutely. death really has become a 4-letter word, hasn't it? It's almost,
it really has.
it's almost this idea, if I say it, I'm somehow tempting or bringing bad luck, and yet we really, really only have that in common. Every single one of us, but not just humans, everything on the planet, every single thing that has life has to complete that circle.
Yeah.
And when I end a service at a crematorium or at a graveside, I very often talk about that never-ending circle.
Yeah.
And you know, somebody said to me recently after I'd said this, a young boy came up to me after the service and said, so does that mean we really are all stardust then? And the answer to that is yes. Isn't that glorious? We really are. And he lit up at this idea, having just lost somebody he loved, he lit up at the idea that that circle will continue and that we are all integral to it. So I
There's
love
no getting out of it.
Absolutely. And I love that we're starting to have more of these conversations. I know one of the things you and I were talking about before we started recording today was it's sort of, as celebrants, how do we show families? What can we do to show families that we are here to help them through this process, not simply people who are here to make a living out of their loss, which I think is about the furthest thing from our minds. It's very much a role where we are there to support at times when emotion makes it very difficult for a family to express what they want. And you and I were talking about this very clever initiative from the Funeral Celebrancy Council called the Celebrant Accord.
Yes.
I like this idea a lot, Bernie. I think it's important, if people are going to work with a celebrant, that they ask them, have you signed up to the Funeral Celebrant Accord? It's a way for us to show people that we take this at the level of care and thought and focus. I think that we should. There are
we don't.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, we're not there just to be wheeled out to deliver a service and then disappear. I mean, none of us who are independent celebrants, I would say, or none of the independent celebrants I know would ever work like that. We become very caring part of that whole group and family's lives, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anybody who wants to know more about this, you can look up the Funeral Celebrancy Council and you'll see the full details of what we agree to do. But Bernie, you touched on something I'd love us to spend a bit more time talking about today. You touched on, we're not just there for the ceremony, we are there to support. We as celebrants, however, often have quite a limit on the level of support we can offer. And I know that something you're doing that I find really inspiring is you are taking that to a much more involved level. You're training at the moment as a doula, aren't you?
I am. I'm training as an end-of-life doula. I've finished the foundation through End of Life, Living Well, Dying Well, End of Life Doula UK, who are a wonderful support network. They have a website for anyone in the UK who needs help and support, who isn't in my area. They can find a doula, or they can just find information on their website. But I've done the foundation, and I'm moving on to the next stage. So I am officially, according to my badge, a doula in training.
How wonderful.
But what that means is I can work as an end-of-life doula, but I get that, and will continue even when I'm not a doula in training, to have access to mentor support myself, so I can support people, and I have a group of people who support me. But it's a wonderful organization, and the idea, what's interesting is the idea of doulas within the UK is mostly unheard of, and we are slowly in the UK becoming aware of birth doulas, and a doula is basically a companion through whatever. So a birth doula is a companion through birth, and they will partner up with a family or a mother to be and support them on their journey through their pregnancy, through their birth and into the and for as long as they need in the early stages of life, and they are there as a companion and a signposter and an advocate and a supporter and and to give you confidence and assurance that what you're doing is the right thing or an appropriate thing or whatever it is you need. So it's sort of fluffy, but it's beautiful in that it's this connected person that takes the pressure off the whole mystique of what's going on at the beginning of life. But we have never in this country thought about the need for that on the approach to death. I have become more and more aware that there is so little conversation and so little points of reference for people who are dying, have died, are grieving. And I think that, and there isn't enough discussion about it. And there are pockets, there's some really great initiatives out there. I mean, there's the Death Cafe initiative, which some of you may have heard of, which was founded by, I'm going to get his name wrong, John Underwood, I think, after his wife died. And that's all about tea and company, discussing and opening up conversations about death and dying and preparing for death. Then there's Dying Matters, which is the Hospice UK initiative, which is wonderful. I think last month, was it last month or was it April, that was Dying Matters month? And it was all about good grief and talking about opening up conversations. So there are initiatives happening within the UK to help people. But I think locally, I realised that quite a lot of them are disjointed, and it's always very difficult to find things. So I'm hoping to, and well, not hoping to, I am starting a life and death matters cafe or coffee morning in July. Actually, we're going to have our first one here in Clonutted, and I've partnered up with some wonderful people. I've partnered up with Antoinette, who has a business called Allowing Time, and she looks at when you die, what normally happens in the UK is that the body is whisked away straight away to a morgue or a hospital or somewhere, and we are under the belief that it is normal for the body to be moved away, when historically it was very normal for the body of somebody you love to stay in the home and be washed and cared for, and people to come and visit and spend time and adjust. The arrival of central heating probably is the thing that really rushed that forward. The whole idea of embalming becoming a norm when it really is unnecessary, and it's also environmentally very unfriendly. You can't have a natural burial if you've had an embalming. So things like that happen as process these days are not things that have to happen. We've just got into this process-driven death plan, and I think so having Antoinette there, who, when her husband died, she was really shocked that her husband was whisked away, because she comes from the Netherlands. That's not what happened.
No, absolutely. He would have probably been at home for 3 or 4 days.
That's right. So
from there to the ceremony.
That's right. Well, she now has a facility and a business which is beautiful called Allowing Time, and she owns a couple of the ice beds which allow you, even if you do have a centrally heated home and not a separate room where you can turn the heating off and keep things cool, to have your loved one with you for a week if you want, as long as you need in the home, and give you time. So she's there. She's a qualified nurse. She's working in partnership with me. There's a lady called Linda Rogers. She works as the community connector, so basically doing what I'm looking to do, but as a business. So she is the person who signposts everyone to the services that are available. Wonderful. For the grieving and the dying, and she is the one for Bilton Clonutted. And I also have a lady called Lynn Parnell, who works as the bereavement facilitator, or I think she should have a little badge that has got little speech marks and says AKA assassin, because that's what that title sounds like, bereavement facilitator. We were joking about it the other
Yes,
day.
it does rather, doesn't it?
It's like your story, which is for another day, where you said heart failure nurse.
Yes.
It's like what
Yeah,
you want
exactly
is a more
the same.
positive
We need to
you
do
want a
something about
positive
that badge.
title. Yeah, but she is the bereavement facilitator, so she helps people through bereavement. She doesn't cause bereavement, and she does that for the Bracken Trust. So there's the four of us who are those three who have very specific qualifications. Myself as a celebrant, an end-of-life doula, and we're going to come together and invite people to a first phase, a first coffee morning, a drop-in coffee morning, where we can discuss what the community would like to have, how often, whether they would like it just as a drop-in centre, whether they would like specialists to come and chat and then have a free chat, or whether they would like activities, and with a view to having across Powys and Carmarthenshire, because I'm on the border, these things on a regular basis. And I think that we need more of those. So you can in most parts of the UK now find a death cafe and a group that have set themselves up to do that, and those are wonderful because they will have people coming in again, so we drop in and they'll talk about things like coffin options. They might have a coffin there and start decorating a cardboard coffin, that it just really just opening up the conversation about dying and about death, and helping people also through the process, the windy roaded process, because as we keep saying, there isn't a process, but the windy woodland, and finding a path through your grief so that you can function.
I'm so pleased to hear that you're doing this, Bernie. I'm a great believer that fear usually is born out of either stories we've told ourselves that aren't true, or ignorance, just ignorance based on either never having known or having been misinformed. And I think the fear about the whole process of not just ourselves dying, but the very thought of having to cope with losing a loved one is so overwhelming because it isn't spoken about. And, a really clear indicator of how we as a society feel about death is when you hear how many people still have not written a will. As if not writing it means it will never happen.
My parents used to be like that. My dad wouldn't talk about it because I think he thought if he wrote a will, it would, I always joke with you, just because you're talking about having sex doesn't mean you're going to get more of it.
Exactly. And death is the same. Absolutely the same. But I do think that avoidance, all that does is build the fear. It feeds the fear. It gives it more space. And in fact, the idea to some people might feel really odd. I'm going to go and have a coffee and listen to people talking about death. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is how to survive and cope and manage and grieve when we lose people, because we will. People are losing their loved ones every day, aren't they? And to not feel completely overwhelmed when that happens to you, because you have got rid of that fear by talking to some professionals, by hearing some people's stories, by also hearing the amazing alternatives we have now. I was with a family the other day who said, we just hate all the process of everything so official and formal, and Dad would have hated that. He hated suits. He hated, standing in queues. He didn't like formality. And to be able to say, well, we don't have to make it formal at all. Did you know there are options? And they had no idea about the options. Now, that's nobody's fault. What that is a reflection of a society where we just don't talk about this. And actually, do you know what they're going to do? They're going to send their dad up to space.
Fantastic. I love that. That's what my husband wants. Well, not till he dies, he keeps adding. But
Well, yes.
You
Gorgeous.
you can have the ashes put into a capsule, which is shot into the edge of space. There's a
Yes.
little camera on it, and it films the opening of the capsule, and your ashes float like stardust into the sky, and you visualize that, and that will play while that's happening. Some music will play, and you will get sent this whole video of it, and it is stunning. Oh God, what are they called? Aura, what's the business? Aura Flights, I think. Aura, yeah.
Yes, I think it is. You sent me the information about it. That was how I knew about it.
They're
Absolutely
wonderful.
glorious.
It's wonderful, and it's
And
beautiful. And if you go on their site, and we'll put a link.
oh, that would
Let's
be
put a
great.
link
We'll
to it
do
at the
that.
bottom. But if you go to their site, there is a video with permission of the families, whose was, I'm sure, of one of these going up and opening, and you can see how beautiful it is, and how
amazing,
how life affirming. Because I guess, I know that's a weird thing to say, but there are two things for certain, with life. One is that you are born. If you are born, if you're here, you have been born, and the other is that you will, at some point, you will die. And it's how we deal with that process, and what we do with that journey from beginning to end, and then the legacy we leave after is the things that matter. They're the only
yes,
things
it's that beautiful poem, isn't it, The Dash? Where it's a glorious poem about how you can focus on the day they were born and the day they died, or you can focus on the dash, the line between the two, because that's where they did everything. That's where they'll have made the difference. And it's such a glorious poem.
I don't think I know it. I'm going to look it up. And again, perhaps we should put it in the.
Oh, we'll definitely put it in.
Let's do
I
that,
read it actually at a service, and everybody said afterwards, what an uplifting, brilliant way to look at it. So yes, we'll do that. We'll share that.
The other thing I do, but already exists, I don't know if you have it in Paris. I'm sure you do. We have this thing in Paris. It's called, which the Paris Teaching Health Board have set up, called My Life, My Wishes. I'm showing you this, but you can't see because it's an audio.
My life, my wishes. This is
my life, my wishes, and it's a document that you can get where you fill in and talk about what you want. It's death planning, basically, and it's something that I do. I personally, I have a program which I do as a one-to-one with people called DIY Before You Die, which is basically my version of a death planning process. And I will sit with the family and I will talk about, I will listen mostly to what they want and what their concerns are. I will help them write a death wishes plan. I will help them extract all the information they didn't realize they would need and other people would need to know. But most importantly, I will help them consider what the impact of their wishes and ideas would be on those that are going to be left behind, how they would feel about it. And I will facilitate conversations to help them have that conversation with the people that they love. So,
oh, that's wonderful, because so many people don't know how to do that. And I think that's what stops them from creating a will.
Yeah. And I think, I make it very clear, I'm not a nurse. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a solicitor. I'm a signposter. I'm a listener, and I'm a communicator. And I will sit with a family and I will help have those difficult conversations.
Yes.
Yeah. This is what mum says she would like, or mum, why don't you tell us what it is you would like? Son, how do you feel about that? How will that affect you if your mum has decided, your mum once says she wants a direct cremation because she doesn't want to be a burden and she doesn't want the cost. How does that impact how you feel about that? What's your thought? All of those things, because I think if you know that whole journey, that whole idea of not talking about it because you don't want to be a burden, that what that often does to the family, especially if you have a long decline and where you can't communicate, it just leaves a lot of doubt and guilt and worry. Would mum, would dad have wanted this? Is this what they would want? I know they didn't want, I don't think they wanted this, but how do I go about preventing that happening? All of those things, what other options are they? And then, okay, mum wants a direct cremation. Does that mean we can't say goodbye? No, it doesn't. You know, you can say goodbye or have a memorial or do something in a different and other way. But, you know, all of those, if you've had those conversations, then obviously it doesn't take away the grief and the pain, but it does take away the doubt and the guilt and the confusion and the worry.
Absolutely.
Go with that, you know.
Absolutely. And here's something I would also just love to say to anybody who's saying, you know, you having to organise my funeral makes me a burden. My 85-year-old mum-in-law said this to me the other day: I don't want to be a burden. The word burden is so diabolical. I don't know who ever told a parent that having brought us to life, having raised us, having probably invested 30, 40 years in us, because when our kids leave home, it doesn't end.
No.
To suggest that us having the right to say goodbye to them, to take care of them, to show some love and respect and thanks, that could be a burden, that is marketing speak, that somebody has said to you to make you spend money on a policy or a program or a thing. Please know, and we work with a lot of families saying goodbye to parents, please know that the last thing children find a funeral for their parents is a burden. Most of them bend over backwards to make sure they find people that treat their parents with care and love and dignity, because that's what they have engendered in them. I did a service last week, no, 2 weeks ago, for a family. All three, and it was the mum. And I must say, she was a real, what I would have said is a real matriarch. She was the proper core of this family. And the same day as we did the service for their mum, and they had a lot of people who they had to then see, before they went to bed that night, each of them individually messaged me to thank me. And when I read their messages the next day, 3 grown-up children, you know, our age, proper grown-ups, when I read their messages the following morning, I thought, there's your legacy. There's what you've done. You have raised 3 people with the most beautiful manners, that even during the most terrible, terrible day they've ever had, saying goodbye to a deeply loved mum, they knew they had to end the day by thanking the people who had done that. What a beautiful legacy. And to suggest somebody who's done that could be a burden, shame on us. Shame on our society for allowing...
It's a very Western society, isn't it? It's a very Western capitalist society thing. It's a way of money grabbing, and you know, it all is, you know, that whole, that, you know, we used to have that pressure that you had to throw all the money at the funeral, and you had to do something very expensive and showy, otherwise you didn't care enough.
Yes, oh gosh, and now it's totally the reverse, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're selfish enough to want us to grieve you, if you totally insist on that, then we must do it as cheaply as possible. And the truth is, this is not how families feel. This is not an appropriate way for us all to live out the end of our lives, worrying that we're causing some desperate hardship to our families. We're actually giving them the opportunity to grieve us, because people who are loved are grieved. It's part of the bliss of having known them. You know, that everything in the world, in the universe, where there is one, there is another, you know, the equal and opposites, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, if I loved you madly, I'm going to grieve you madly. And that is part of the joy of having known you. You know, I still, to this day, I lost my grandfather the day I did my first O-level. And to this day, I grieve my grandfather. At certain moments, he'll pop into my head and I'll feel the tears in my eyes. Does that make him a burden? Gosh, no. What a blessing he was in my world.
And what a blessing that he comes into your mind so often and so profoundly and so, you know.
So I really want whoever needed to hear that from us today, I really want you to hear that. Yeah. This end of life is, people are there to care for you because it matters, because it is important, and because you deserve to let the family and friends who loved you celebrate you.
Yeah, and that doesn't, just to emphasize, that doesn't mean spend huge amounts of money to demonstrate it. You can do something beautiful and honorable and respectful and perfect for somebody without throwing huge amounts of money at it. So don't be led down the, you know, it's all about how showy it is thing. It's, you know, it's the same with weddings. You know, you can show someone how much you love them without spending 30 grand on a wedding. That doesn't mean you love them any less because you've had something small and intimate. It's not about the pound ting tings. You know, the other thing I just quickly want to mention, and I know we're winding up, Dinah, but I've had, since I've talked about doing this DIY before you die, the most people who have contacted me are those who don't have or don't think they have community and people, and they're really worried about what will happen if they have no family to organize things and trying to get things in order themselves. So one of the things I am doing is helping them to find out where they can put their paperwork and their wishes, death wishes, and their advanced planning and all of those things. But the other thing when I was talking to Lynn and Linda, who are doing the coffee morning with me, is we were talking about helping people recognize who their community are. So when people think they haven't got people, they probably have. You know, certainly around here they have.
Aren't we blessed with that?
Mm-hmm. So it's trying to help them think about who their circle is. So if you put yourself in the center of a circle, thinking about who is, I mean, obviously if you're married, then your husband is sort of right next to you in that circle, and then your children. But there are also your postman, the milkman, the person that you see in the shop every day. These are all people who are connected to you and to some degree will have some influence or willingness to be involved. So we're kind of trying to talk about connectivity and not feeling so isolated and lonely and all of those things as well. So it's a huge topic, and I'm sure that this conversation that we've had today, if people are listening and have got to this point, will, you know, may have affected some people or brought up worries and concerns. And we're more than happy, both of us, if you have any concerns or thoughts as a result of listening to us, is if you message us and we can't help ourselves, we as celebrants, doulas, mentors, whichever hat we're wearing on that day, we will signpost you to somebody who can help.
Yes, thank you, Bernie. It's really important for people to know there are lots of, including free, wonderful organisations out there who will offer real support over this. And we know that for some people this can feel very traumatic. So please don't hesitate. Do reach out if you'd like us to point you in the direction of someone who could help with that. Well, as always, I love talking to you.
I know, it's always so lovely spending this. I'm so glad we set this up, because it means that even if we are busy in our lives, we have this time once a month where we just get together and have a coffee and a chat, and it's really wonderful. And it's always, spending time with you is always life affirming, Dinah.
Thank you. Likewise, my friend. And thank you everybody for joining us. We'd love to hear from you as always. If you have anything you'd like us in particular to talk about in an episode. But otherwise, we look forward to connecting with you again next month.
Yes, bye now. Bye.
Ask a Celebrant is unscripted, and we base it on the questions we receive from our clients and you, our listeners. We'd love to hear from you. Do join the conversation.
See you next month.